Okay, so thanks for joining me again. It is Friday, March 1st, and we are getting a warm-up. At the very beginning of the video sequence, if you saw that, that's my weather station readout. It is down in the single digits, and we have had terrible weather. High winds, freezing cold, the bees are being challenged, and it's a mess out there. And then yesterday I was outside videoing bees doing their cleaning flights because although it was only about 26 or 27 degrees Fahrenheit, we got sunshine and low wind, so the bees flew out. Bees that are in uninsulated bee boxes tend to warm up faster and zip out and do cleaning flights sooner. When they're insulated, they hold the cold longer, and the bees aren't necessarily aware that there's this very brief warm-up. So we're having that again today, and I'm going to go outside. For those of you who are new and haven't watched any of my frequently asked questions videos, again, this is frequently asked questions video number 6, and I'm responding to questions that people provide down in the comment section below the video or on my Facebook, Fred's Fine Fowl, and my website is fredsfinefowl.com or freerangechickens.org. So it's chickens and bees. So this is geared towards beginning beekeepers. These are some basic things, but sometimes equipment is discussed that may be of use to those of you who have been doing it for a while. And again, it's just based on the input, and thank you for those of you who took the time to write in and share your questions. And of course, we're doing the questions that are of interest to more than one person so that we get the broadest interest base here and that the information is the most helpful to most of you. So first is today's weather and the bees in snow. So as I said, we're in a warm-up right now, but we do have snow everywhere. And yesterday I posted a video of honeybees doing cleansing flights, landing in snow, and then rolling around in the snow, and sometimes not making it back to the hive. So people ask if there's a reason why I don't pick those bees up and put them back on the landing boards of the hives they come from. Now often it's not evident what hive they come from in the first place, but these are cleansing flights, and sometimes the bees are leaving the hive because they might be sick. So it's not always the best thing to do. I mean, you're going to empathize with the bee and think, wow, it's out there and it's freezing in the cold. I can just pick it up and put it on the landing board and save its life. And then you could also think, well, so many of those bees are doing that, and the only reason that you're even noticing is because you happen to be out there. And there's this philosophy about the starfish on the beach. You know, there's thousands of starfish, and you walk up to one and toss it out in the ocean, and somebody says, why'd you bother? There's thousands of them, you know, on the beach, and what does it matter that you toss that one in? Well, it matters to that one. So, me personally, I don't run around, you know, picking up the bees and warming them with my breath and putting them on the landing board. I found over the years that if you do that, most of the time once you put it on the landing board, that bee seems annoyed and flies back out anyway. Or the guard bees may actually block it from coming back in. So there are reasons that we don't often know. Now there is some curious behavior though. When we were watching these bees in the snow, and I use this camera that I have now that gets me very close to them. It's a Nikon Z7, but I put it on a macro lens. And I laid down in the snow and made these lengthy video sequences of the bees scooting around in the snow on the surface, and there are some interesting observations being made by some of you that were watching that behavior. And the bees are nice and healthy, their wings look great, their abdomens are extended, they're nice and heavy, so they look well fed, they're not like licking the snow trying to get water from it. They, in every regard, they seem super healthy. So when they hit that snow, they tend to, and I'll put a link to this video because it was just posted yesterday, so you can look it up or look at the link in the video description, but the bees were like pulling the snowflakes against them and scooting along sideways, scooting along on their back. And you might think, well, that bee's suffering and it just can't get off of the snow. Well, that proves actually not to be the case. So this is what's interesting about that. The bees scoot around in the snow and they buzz upside down and they do all these little movements, but they can very competently flip over, get upright, and then they start buzzing their wings and fly away. So if the bee is really bothered by the fact that it landed in the snow in the first place, because they're eliminating, that's what a cleansing flight is, they go out and they're going to defecate in the snow. But if they're really bothered by the fact that they impacted the snow, they would just flap their wings right away and fly away immediately. But that's not what they do. They scoot around in that snow, and it does look like they're almost grooming with flakes of snow. So it actually might be a behavior of cleansing. Aside from going out just to go to the bathroom and come back, they may actually be rubbing their bodies against the snow to dislodge something that we don't know anything about. It might just be general cleaning and grooming. So it is interesting, and more than one viewer made a comment about that, and it made me really sit and look and think about, yeah, you know, that bee could have landed in the snow and said, well, snow's bad, and I'm getting out of here because I'm getting cold and I'm just going to die. But they don't do that right away. So, I mean, it's not like they got warmer and were capable after scooting around the snow for a long time, and then they fly off. So if they have the ability to fly off after a couple of minutes in the snow, then why don't they just fly off immediately? It's interesting. And if you know anything about bees grooming on the snow, it's kind of like, I was thinking about this too, that fish sometimes will go to the bottom of a lake or river and they'll rub themselves against the rocks and things like that to dislodge parasites and other things. So share your thoughts on that behavior. If you watch that video, you can comment on that video. But I think it's a behavioral thing that we might want to look into a little more, and I'm going to pay attention to that even more today. It's going to hit the 40s, and it's sunny again, and the wind speeds are very low. So we're going to see more of that behavior, and I'm going to go out and pay more attention to that. So it's very interesting. So during the cleansing flights, are they actually playing in the snow? Are they grooming themselves? So that's really, and it was only 26 degrees when they were doing that. So it's very interesting. So my next question for today is, don't forget to have your free-range, non-GMO, cage-free, organically grown coffee with fresh squeezed sugar. Okay, this question is from Brett Moore. Can you prevent swarming by removing brood frames? And what to do with splits if you only want a couple of hives? Well, that's a good question right now, because the bee numbers are going to start building up really fast. And if you're looking for a window of opportunity in the northeastern United States and you're thinking about building up your bees, this is the time. If you want to put those pollen patties on your hives, the protein patties to boost them, this is the time. So during these warm-ups, we can get in there. Now what's going to happen is, let's say you just have a couple hives and you want to stay there and you don't want to grow your bees. Well, make sure they have enough feed, but don't overfeed and boost them. You'll notice that people that are developing bees for the market, people that are developing splits to sell, are going to be feeding their bees a lot. They're going to be building their numbers intentionally, and they're going to provide every resource they can think of. But if that's not you, if all you want is to get your bees through and they still have honey and they still have resources, just don't go overboard on building them up. So let them do that on their own. Now the next thing that's going to happen is, as the nectar flow comes in and the pollen starts coming in, you can see very small clusters of bees all of a sudden explode into a full box. So you're going to have to pay attention to what's going on in those hives. So you're going to have to watch the landing boards. You're going to have to look at the numbers that are coming and going, the little traffic jams that are happening on the landing boards, and it's also time to open up those entry reducers too if you get a lot of bees and there really is a traffic jam there. We want to be well ventilated, and we don't want to impede their progress to and from resources out in the environment. So if you don't want more bees and you don't want to do splits, then what do? Well, you expand the boxes that you have. You look at the resources in the colony and you look at the numbers of bees that are building up. And one thing's for sure, first of all, the bees that are going to swarm, you can just let them swarm out and they'll cut their numbers then. But that's a risk. Why is it a risk if you just let your bees swarm? That's just a honeybee colony giving birth to another honeybee colony, right? Well, the thing of it is, you're going to see a number of little queen cells that are going to be built up in your colony, and they swarm before the new queens hatch out. So they also swarm out with the old queen before those new queens have hatched and before they've mated, obviously. Now we run the risk, especially early in the spring when there aren't a lot of drones out there. Those new queens may hatch out and make a mating flight and never be mated by enough drones or healthy drones, and they may never make it back to your colony. So there is a risk by allowing a swarm and just letting your colony recover and produce more queens, you run the risk of ending up being queenless. So allowing swarms is one way to reduce your numbers and not have to expand your apiary, but it comes with a risk. So if you wind up queenless, so once a swarm has happened and you're looking and there are no eggs in there, and it may be a week or two after those new queens hatch out, hopefully it'll be just one, although I've had several colonies that had sister queens operating and laying within that colony. Usually it's just one, but if you can't find eggs being laid within a week or two, you need to call in some replacement queens, and you're going to have to install those. So a colony that's been queenless for a while, you can replace the queen and do that. But if you're trying to limit the number of bees and you don't want to expand, you can just allow the swarm. The other thing is partner up with new beekeepers that do want bees, and then you can actually do a controlled split. Provide the new beekeeper with, half of your brood frames and reduce the bee numbers that way. Because you can actually go from I've seen this happen so many times. You have a cluster of bees that's, just about that big. They occupy 2 or 3 frames on the brood, and it seems like those are very low numbers, but then as the nectar flow starts up and the warm weather hits, that queen, you find out, has actually been laying and planned ahead, so that now you have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,600 new bees hatching every day in that colony, and then you get this big population explosion. That's when you're likely to lose your bees to a swarm. So you could do a split. If you know somebody that needs bees, then you can get into your hive, and once you see that all the resources are great and that this new beekeeper wants bees, they bring their box over. Now, I don't use those nuke boxes. Those are nucleus boxes. They sometimes have 3 or 5 frames in them, and people transfer bees into that with a queen, and then usually that's for selling them off. I tell people to bring a full-size 8-frame or 10-frame deep box with a landing board all hooked up and covered with a screen so that they don't fly out, of course, in transit. But then you can give them a bunch of your frames of brood, and I recommend that, just happen to have this sitting here. This is a queen cage, and I recommend that you have a few of these handy when you are pulling brood frames and you're looking at the queen and the eggs that are being laid. And once you find the queen, you can press this right over her onto the frame, and then you know for sure that she's not going to get away. And that's when you can safely remove other brood frames and put them in somebody else's box with all those nurse bees on the frames. And you should also be pulling some of the frames that have plenty of pollen and some resources like capped honey, for example, to go with that also. And I recommend, if you don't want to expand your own colony, help somebody else get started with bees or expand their own. Because if your numbers are big and your numbers are strong, I have one colony this year in particular that I know it's going to explode. Its wall-to-wall bees are ready. It's 4 boxes tall, and I know I'm going to expand my apiary with those survivor line bees. That's what I'm going to do. If you want to keep it at 2, sometimes it's hard. You're fighting nature. It is a trait of honeybees that when they're healthy and when they're rapidly expanding, that they're going to split on their own and they're going to give birth as a superorganism to another colony of bees. So what to do with splits if you only want a couple of hives? You can just give them away. If you allow them to swarm, you run the risk of losing the queen and not having a new queen that mates. And the survivability of the swarm that is emitted is very, very low. They're counting on finding a new place to live, and most often there just isn't one. I have these bee boxes that magically get occupied, and they're just setting off to the side and the lids are off, but then I'll close them back up again once I put in new acorn frames, and they're just in standby so that when I do a split or something, I have boxes ready to go. And I've gone to look into those and had them just be occupied by a swarm. That's, a foot off the ground, right in the apiary. I had the state bee inspector come out to do an inspection, and he asked about a box at the end of my run there, and I said, oh yeah, that's just a box in storage. And he said, well, there's bees in it. And we opened it up, and sure enough, a swarm had moved in, just a voluntary swarm, free bees. I'm sure they came from my own apiary, and they just expand on their own. So I don't even know if I answered your question, but the best thing is, if the numbers are big, expand the resources and space they have to expand, and try to prevent them from swarming, because you don't want to take the risk of losing your bees. Next is from Jack Tomberlin. I hope I pronounced that right. He has 2 packages coming, 2 bottom boards, deep box, 4 shallow frames with drawn cone, and he's going to divide those frames between these 2 deeps. He has a shim feeder and a migratory top cover. Okay, one of the things, Jack, in this question is, everything's great, you have the packages coming, you want to make sure that your boxes are ready to go, and it sounds like everything's good here, but he has 4 shallow frames and he's setting up 2 deep boxes. So he's got a deep box, he's got a landing board, he's got a shim that he's going to put his feeder in. Those are all good things. And then, but these shallow frames, this is a shallow frame. Well, this is a medium frame. There's actually a skinnier one than this. But if you take frames like this one's from the Acorn Company, if you put this in a deep box, because it just happens to have resources in it and you want to feed it to your bees, what the bees are going to do is they're going to start building comb even off of the bottom of it, because there's all this open space in that deep box. So I don't personally recommend putting frames that don't fit the box they're in. I know that it seems good to have those resources and have drawn comb so they can go to work right away, but they will run random comb off of the bottom, and technically that's not allowed inside your hive. They should stay within the frames, and everything needs to be removable and inspectable. They can run amok and start connecting their comb all over the place that way. So even though it is a good resource, you're going to want to trade those out with frames that match the box size. And you're almost fine just starting off. The package bees are coming, you've got queens coming. By the way, these acorn frames are heavy wax dipped. I've put these in boxes by themselves with nothing on them, and the bees draw them out right away. I recommend that when you get a package of bees, that you overfeed them. You give them everything they need, these hive top feeders and stuff. Make sure that those bees have constant resources available, because they're going to use sugar water to make their comb. That's going to be that really white, super clean looking, brand new comb. You can tell when it's made from sugar syrup. It has no color to it at all. It is white. And they'll build that right out right away, and I think you'll be fine. I think you should put in the deep frames that match the boxes rather than those medium frames. And the shim feeder, and he has a migratory top cover. I personally, for those of you who don't know, because this is beginning thing, but a standard cover is a telescoping cover that sits over that top box. So, I don't have one handy, sorry. The migratory covers are flat, they sit flush on that top box, and then they just have an edge of wood over each end, so it sits flat and covers the box. The purpose of those covers is so the commercial beekeepers can jam all the boxes right up against each other and pallet them and ship them out. So those are not, the migratory covers are my least favorite cover of all for beekeeping. And that's because it's designed for utility. It's really not designed, for the bees. A telescoping cover cuts down, there won't be any venting on the sides. You can have an overhang in your own apiary. So like the Bee Smart design covers, the gabled roofs that are on the Flow-Hives, they extend out and the rain runs off and drops down, not straight down the side of the hive, but out and away. We have, that's an example of a telescoping cover right there on a model scale. And those are much better, in my opinion, than having these migratory top covers, unless you're planning to go into commercial beekeeping. The telescoping, Bee Smart design types, all these vented covers and things are much better for your bees when you have an apiary where you don't have to jam all your boxes right up against each other. So I hope that answers the question. I think it's going to go well either way, but if you put in a a medium-sized frame or a shallow frame in a full-size box, just expect them to start running comb everywhere. And keep us posted on how that goes. Now, upcoming, there were a lot of questions that were relevant specifically to the Flow-Hives, and I know a lot of people don't even want to hear about a Flow-Hive. So, in fact, if you put that in a title, some people won't even watch the video. So, for those who are interested in how to set up a beehive from start to finish, I'm going to use as an example a Flow-Hive configuration, specifically the Flow-Hive 2. And the reason is that thing has some really good integrated pest management systems that I'm going to talk about. Let's see, and how to speed up the acceptance of those flow frames. Some people are asking if they should put wax on it, should they be spraying it with sugar water. What can you do to get the bees to use those flow frames quicker? So I'm going to take a whole brand new system and I'm going to talk about it from top to bottom. How to feed with the Flow-Hive, how to vent it, how to use pest management systems. They have a drawer, all the features of it. I'm doing a video dedicated just to that, so we're going to move on from there. And that's coming up. If you want to see that, by the way, go ahead and subscribe, and there's a little bell down there. If you want to see when I get new videos, you click that and it shows the little echo lines next to that bell. That's how you get notified when I put up a new video. So that's coming this week. The next question is from Danielle Harden. Slatted racks, are they necessary or are they hype? Okay. I have to be careful when I talk about products like that because the people that sell them might get mad if you say something negative. I don't know how many of you have actually heard of slatted racks. I've had them for years and I just have to be honest and say I don't use them. But I just happen to have one sitting right here. If you've never heard of a slatted rack, all it is it looks like a feeder shim, and this will sit, let me get my ugly old landing board here, bottom board. So it goes just like this. You have a bottom board, and normally after the bottom board you're just going to put your deep brood box on there, right? And then somebody came up with this idea. Now this is, by the way, it's not a new idea. These things were invented long ago. This is what a slatted rack looks like, and this is where it goes. It sits right on your bottom board, and then your deep box goes right on top of this. So what is the purpose of adding that? Well, I think, and remember, I'm in the northeastern United States, so it's pretty cold up here. This is supposed to reduce bearding for your bees by adding more ventilation. It gives you a standoff space. So if you look at the entry board here, the bees normally get in, and what they would encounter would be the bottoms of the frames, which would be your deep frames, because that's what your box should have, your brood box. So all the brood is in here, and when these frames go all the way down to this level, roughly, the bees come in, they go straight to the frames, and the resources are right there. And the thinking is that with these frames going right to the bottom board, that close to the entry, that the queen is hesitant to lay eggs all the way down here. So by having a slatted board, you have slats here, just exactly as it's described, that are 3/4 of an inch thick, and they line up directly with, in this case, this is a 10 frame. So each frame of the deep box is a little above that. You have bee space, which is 3/8 of an inch. So hopefully the bees will not glue these frames to these slats, and they tend not to. But the thinking is that now you've created a space barrier that the bees can travel in and out of that protects the brood by, this is a 2-inch frame, that keeps the brood up and away from this landing board, so it cuts down on predators, it cuts down on bee robbers, and supposedly people will say that it gives it a space for the non-employed bees to hang out instead of bearding on the outside. But in my hives, the bees, you don't find them congregating just inside the door and hanging out. So this landing board area, my bees, and I know this from my observation hives and from when I open up to inspect hives, they'll be all the way up in the top box, up near the corner, clustered, doing nothing until they're needed for getting resources from pollen, plants, you know, the flowers, they're going to get nectar and everything else. When those bees are unemployed, they just congregate. Sometimes too, when there's a big nectar flow and the honey's loaded inside the hive, they're trying to ventilate it, and that's when you see bearding. You'll see thousands of bees just hanging off the landing board, sometimes up near the telescoping cover, and they'll just congregate on the front of the hive up there, where this is supposed to help with that. I don't personally think that it does that. I don't think that the bees are saying, wow, extra space. Like the underside, these do not go all the way down, so these are lifted off a little bit. But the other thinking, of course, is that for those who treat with oxalic acid, when you put the iron in there, if you're going to put a vaporizer in there, you slide that in, and this provides a wooden barrier now between the wax and that vaporizer, so it's less opportunity for your vaporizer to catch wax on fire, and it won't supposedly burn your bees. So I guess the thing is, with this having been out as long as it is, a lot of people sell them. I'll put a link to one of these down in the video description if you want to go check it out and maybe read some reviews. I think, you know, people swear by them and stuff, but then when you get into these conversations about how it specifically works, they're kind of vague. There are people that actually sell them that personally say, I don't use it, I don't recommend it, but I'll sell you one if you want to buy one. So again, this one just sits in my garage. I don't use it. I don't know if it works or not, to be honest. So, since we're sharing about it, and since Danielle wants to know, are they necessary, not necessary, or do they live up to the hype? Well, the hype is that they prevent bearding. I would say that's not true. Will they protect your bees? Will they protect the wax from being burned when you're doing oxalic vaporization? I would say that's definitely true because, you know, the wax is going to be up here, so there's another airspace there. And the other thing is, some people say that, now these are used when there's not a screen bottom board. So this is a solid bottom board, and this just provides a more venting space at the bottom of your hive. So if you have experience with these things, and if you know for sure that these are helping, or if you have experience with these and you know for sure that it doesn't do what they say it will, please share about that down in the comments below this video, because I'd like to learn more about it. I just have it. Haven't used it, don't see a reason for it, but they're not expensive. I mean, you can buy those things for like 20 bucks. They're 3/4 of an inch thick side to side, because that matches the 3/4 inch bottom rung of your frames. The whole thinking is that when you look down between the frames, you see an airspace all the way to the bottom board. So it looks like it's not there when the frames are all lined up over the top of it. So what does it benefit? I honestly don't know. We've just added more space and maybe more protection for the bees. If you use them and you have good stories or bad stories, I'd like to read about that. So the next one, Alan Schwark. Anyway, Alan moved hives to avoid tree fall 15 feet. Well, that messed the bees up. This actually comes up a lot, and I'm glad that you're asking that question, Alan, because this is actually a great time of year to be moving your hives around. So the bees are very specific during the season when they're out getting nectar and the bees are all foraging, which they're not doing right now, at least not where I live. So you have an opportunity, if you want to move your beehives, to do that now, because the bees that are in there are going to be doing orienteering flights. You're going to see bees fly out of your hive, and they're going to start doing these loops, these corkscrew loops up into the air. They seem to look around, then they seem to change their mind and just come back. Those are brand new foraging bees that are orienteering. They're figuring out what the landscape is, what the landmarks are, and where they live. So if you've had to move a hive this time of year because of trees potentially falling or that have fallen, this is the perfect time of year to do it. And so for the reason that I just described, most of the bees that are in that colony right now haven't been out. They don't know where they live. So this is the time if you want to move those hives. So moving at 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet won't mess them up. Now here's the thing about honeybees when they're coming into their hive. I have some of my most successful beehives are out and away from the other beehives. So in other words, if you've been watching my videos over any period of time, I am spreading out my bee boxes more and more, where they used to be, within 4 or 5 inches of each other in a big long row. So now I have one in a spruce tree, I have one over by my acorn, and I have the walnut trees, and I have them over by the hazelnut bushes. So each of these trees has its own distinct scent as well. So the thinking is, first of all, there won't be any more worker drift. And by that I mean is when you have a whole bunch of beehives in a row, and they all look relatively the same, you'll find that at one end or the other of that lineup, the bees will tend to build the numbers, and you can actually lose bees from some of the center colonies. As those bees tend to come in loaded with resources, nectar and pollen, they land on a landing board of a hive that they don't belong to, but they're tired, and they go to move in. When they meet a guard bee and they're loaded with pollen and nectar, 9 times out of 10, they get received into that colony. So you actually have bees missing the mark and landing on others, and it's called drift, and they'll build the numbers, and they'll actually start to thin out the numbers that are in the hive that they left. On the flip side of that, bees are very specific about where they go into a hive. So if you have a beehive and a landing board, standard landing board, and an entry reducer, for example, and the bees are coming and going out of that, and then out of the blue, you establish an upper entrance to that hive, that's fine. Eventually bees will start using that. But if you do that, open an entrance in the top of that hive, but then suddenly close off the landing board entrance, they take forever to find their way into that hive through that new opening. They are so specific about, once they've located their hive, they're very specific about exactly where they're going to go in. So when you change even the configuration, it seems to confuse them for a while. So, and that's why some people can have hives on top of each other, hives jammed next to each other, and the bees are coming and going to their parent colony. So that is in contrast to the overworked field foragers that are coming back and just tend to land on another beehive's landing board by mistake, but then get admitted to that colony because they're loaded with resources. I have also seen bees land on the wrong board, get chased off by the guard bees, and then go to the next colony, which is the one that they belong to, and then they do a taste test and they go in. So it is a great time to take advantage of the fact that these bees have not been out, that they don't know where they live, and this is the time to move your colonies. So I'll be doing splits and things like that, and when I do the split, because those are nurse bees, then I'm going to move those hives into other places entirely, but we're only talking like 20 feet away. So it's not like I'm spreading them out everywhere, but my wife pointed out that I have this big fenced in area and it's already an electric fence and everything. Why do I have an apiary, in another location where I had to put another electric fence up? It's so logical, So yeah, you can move your colonies around, and of course to places where the bees are going to do really well. But the bees that I've had stuck in Colorado blue spruce, the hazelnuts, and the walnut tree groves and things like that, they tend to do really well. In fact, I had a swarm that I collected in September that I put in a single deep, and it just has a feeding shim on top, and it has a rapid round feeder in it, and right now it's dry feed. People just would say that's never going to make it. That colony's not going to make it. Well, knock on wood, but right now, that tiny cluster of bees has survived this terrible winter, high winds and all. So they're doing great. Now, I don't know if spreading them out like that. There's another thing, that your bees are not interacting with each other so much if your colonies are separate, if they're put out on their own in different spots, standalone individual colonies. So I think they find their homes quicker, they're at the right place at the right time, and they may actually be benefiting from not sharing pest problems with other colonies that way too. So ongoing, food for thought. But yeah, you can move those hives. So that's it for today. I'm going to go outside and look at my bees. If you have questions that you'd like me to look into or products and things, I'm already working up frequently asked questions number 7. write them in the comment section down below, and I'll be glad to look into it. And if it's something I already know, if I don't know something, I'm not going to pretend that I do. So, I'll either do more research or just tell you that I just don't know it. I'm not beyond sending you to someone who already has covered that really well. So thank you for those of you who've been watching this series over time, and thank you for contributing to this one. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.